Hey everyone, welcome to Rachel's Studio. I'm Rachel Parker Varner, and with me, you will learn not just the how, but the why of watercolor so you move along your painting journey a lot faster. And while I do a lot of animals, I do also do some landscapes, some portraits, so you get a little good mix of everything with me, but heavy on the animals, heavy on the loose, painterly, impressionistic approach of painting watercolor. So in today's video, we're going to learn about how to paint animals the easy way. And thank you, by the way, to Janet Greco. Lola is her muse, and they have a really special relationship. And Janet is also an amazing impressionistic painter, and she has a Facebook impressionistic painting group. So be sure to go check out Janet Greco, her work, and all her amazing pictures she has of Lola. And she was so generous to share this muse. By the way, this tutorial will not be about just painting a black and white tuxedo cat playing with a ribbon. The ideas and techniques that I'm going to share in today's video can be applied to painting any animal. And some of the techniques will be applicable no matter what you're painting, whether it's a tree, flower. Every subject has edges that need to be softened, areas to be lightened, things to be fixed, values to be balanced, and we're going to talk about all of that today. And for those of you who watched last week's video, I talked about an epiphany I had, which was amazing. I used really simple techniques thinking it was going to be a tighter painting, and I was doing that for my more beginner-oriented students. It kills me when I hear my students say, I just couldn't do it. Your tutorial was great, but I just can't do it. I hate to hear that. That just breaks my heart. So I've been making a point lately to paint for some of my tutorials, not all of them, but some of them are a more simple wet on dry approach with lots of layers to help my more beginner students have more control so they can get better results as a beginner. And so that's why I've been painting in this style for some of my tutorials lately, because I want to make painting in a dreamy, loose, realistic way more accessible to more painters, no matter what level you're at. So, by the way, if you would like to join my Patreon for free, you can do that. And I share a lot of good content, even with my free members. And the higher tier you join, the more content you get access to. You can also join my free Facebook group where you can post your paintings. And later in this video, I'm going to just kind of talk a little bit more loosely about where I am in my journey. I'm going to share some of my students' work and why I do what I do, why I am sharing these more beginner-oriented tutorials, and also where I am professionally as an artist who's been painting almost 25 years now, and where I'm going with my work and how that weaves into what I offer to my online students. So I hope you'll stay tuned for that. This tutorial is available on my Patreon as a 3-hour in-depth real-time tutorial, ad-free, and it comes with a line drawing, a reference, and when you join, you get access to a whole library of tutorials. But anyway, like I promised, here we go. If you are a beginner, you may not know about masking. So what masking is a liquid plastic that you paint onto your painting before you do anything else. And when the masking dries, it will save the white of your paper. In watercolor, white is the white of your paper. So masking is really useful for when you have tiny little white parts like whiskers and glints in the eye that are hard to paint around, impossible to paint around. So you can use masking. That's not the only way that you can get white. You can use white paint. You can use white gel pens, white gouache. It doesn't have to be masking. Masking is a little bit more difficult, but it is one way to save your whites. And in a minute, I'm going to spill my masking. And so I'm going to show you what to do when that happens. And so that is what I mean by a lot of the tips that I give you in this video are going to be things that you can use no matter what you're painting. And you can use masking in all kinds of situations. So if you spill your masking like this on anything, on your painting, just let it dry and then take it back up. You can use a crepe eraser. This is a rubber cement eraser that makes it easier to remove it. And then I'll just reapply it. But I'm not going to show that again. I do use soap on my bristles to protect my brush. All right, next, let me give you a tip about painting eyes. I have whole videos on painting eyes that are free on my YouTube channel. I will link that here. Whenever I link a painting or a video, it will not take you out of this video. It will just queue it up for you to watch after this video. Actually, what I was demonstrating here is if you are painting your eyes and you make a big mistake, like you paint in an area you don't mean to, add water and then blot. So that's another tip. See, these are tips you can use no matter what you're painting. So then I have an eye formula. I'm not going to go over it here because I have a whole video on that is free. But one thing that I will say about painting eyes or any color is the color is not as important. It's the value that's important, getting your lights, mediums, and darks correct. And that's true of no matter what subject you're painting. If you're going for realism, you've got to get your values right. Even if it's dreamy realism, impressionistic realism, you've got to get your values right. Another really good skill to learn is how to do an underpainting. Again, no matter what you're painting. For example, your underpainting can really make your painting look a lot more interesting, depending on what color you use. For example, if you use yellow as an underpainting under red, it will make your red look a lot brighter. But anyway, last week you saw me paint an underpainting like this with a bamboo brush with burnt sienna. So be sure to go back and watch last week's video. But this week I'm going to use my silver black velvet size 4 round. So you don't have to have the exact brushes I use. You don't have to have the exact colors. What is important is painting on decent paper. And another thing that's really important is getting your values right and your drawing right, which I always recommend beginners use a tracing if they are not good at drawing and if you want your painting to look realistic. If you don't care that it doesn't look realistic and the proportions look a little wonky, then that's a different story. But if you want your painting to look realistic, even if you paint it in an impressionistic way, you've got to have your drawing right. And if you don't want to spend years getting your drawing perfect, you want to practice painting, then use a tracing. Us professionals call it a transfer. So almost all realistic leaning painters use line drawings or transfers. Another tip I would give you is to use a really good reference photo. If you don't start with a good reference photo with good light or something good about it, your painting is not going to turn out great, especially if you're a beginner. Now, as you get more advanced, you can do things to make your painting better than what the reference would suggest. But when you're starting out, you will really set yourself up for success if you only paint from good reference photos. Again, I have a whole video about how to pick reference photos. I will link that up here in the upper right corner. And briefly, let's go over what I'm doing here. I am doing an underpainting. I talked about that in last week's video, but for this cat, he's black. So I think in terms of an underpainting that will support black beautifully is a purple color. And also your underpainting serves to tie together the whole painting. So this purple underpainting will tie together all the different black parts of this painting. And so you do the underpainting, you let it completely dry, and then you can paint on top of it with another color. For this painting, I will use black. But anyway, here I'm continuing on with getting my colors in. I'm going to show you a blending technique real quick. This is a great technique no matter what you paint because you're going to want to soften edges. So if you want to soften this way, there's a couple ways using scrubbers, or this way. This is using the thirsty brush method, which is you get a hard edge, and while the painting is still wet, you go in with a clean brush that's a little bit blotted, so it's damp. It's called thirsty. This is thirsty brush, and you just rub it along the edge of the hard edge, and it will soften it. The other way that you can soften edges is to let your paint completely dry and use a scrubber. And I've demonstrated that in other tutorials as well. In fact, I did a whole tutorial on my scrubber on this channel for free. So I will link that here in the upper right corner if I can. All right, something that I really liked in these eyes is I used cobalt turquoise, which is a granulating color in the top third of the eye. So I'm dotting that in the top third of the eye, and the granulation made it really interesting. I also used my push technique where I drop a bit of clean, clear water next to the dark, wet paint, and the clean, clear water pushes into the darker paint and makes an interesting granulation effect. I have a whole video on the push technique if you are curious to know more about that. But I loved these particular eyes, how that really made these eyes look interesting to use that granulating paint in the top third of the iris, which is my eye painting formula I use on cats, dogs, humans, turtles, birds, whatever. And that is the top third of the eye is dark. The middle third of the iris is medium, or the local color, the actual color of the iris, and the bottom third of the iris is light. And here you see me using the push technique by dropping a little bit of clean, clear water at the bottom third of the iris to push up into the darker paint above it to create a really interesting edge. It is an advanced technique, but it is really fun to practice. And the more you practice, the better you'll get. And if you push water into cream consistency, thick paint, then it really gives an interesting effect. All right, now I'm getting some lamp black. Now in watercolor, you can paint layer over layer over layer as long as you let the layers dry in between. And here I'm going to pick up where I started earlier with a dry brush technique, which I talked a lot about in last week's video. So I'm not going to go over that as much here, but I'm using Daniel Smith lamp black. If you want to mix a more complex looking black, you can. Using a good color to use to mix a black is French ultramarine and transparent pyrrole orange or burnt sienna. And if you use a half and half mixture of those two colors, it will make a beautiful nuanced black. However, since this is a more beginner-oriented tutorial, I just use black and I think it looks fine. I don't think it looks flat because I used a lot of dry brush technique and I let the bottom layers kind of shine up through the black paint. All right, here's another trick to use to soften edges. Whether you're painting flowers, cats, dogs, humans, whatever, you let your paint completely dry and you use a stiff scrubber. You get it wet with clean, clear water, but your paint is completely dry. You're using paint that's not as staining and you're using good paper. So those are all the tips really, really quick on how to be successful with a scrubber. You've got to use the right paper, which is usually a nice quality 100% cotton cold press. Arches and Bao Hung are the best at it. And you use clean, clear water, and non-staining paints react to scrubbing a lot better. If you're using a hot press, like Stonehenge hot press is beautiful for lifting. Not all hot presses I think are, but I found Stonehenge hot press lifts beautifully too, but you can't use a stiff scrubber. You've got to use a more delicate brush. And I've got several tutorials now up of hot press. In fact, I did a hot press version of the Fox and a cold press version of the Fox. So if you join my Patreon, you'll also see how I painted the same exact Fox on hot press. So be sure to check that out. All right, so I'm just continuing to get my kitty covered, putting on that black. Some of the black, I make it more of a dark purple in areas just to add some nice nuance. But next, let's work on the eyes a little bit more. So I paint some blue into the pupils because if you make your pupils all a flat black, they will look really flat. So have part of the pupil like a blue or a gray and then part of it black, and it will give it a lot more depth and dimension. All right, now let's learn a little bit about how to make smooth shadows, smooth cast shadows. What you see me doing here is I'm using a larger brush, my 3/4 oval, and it covers more ground and it also evenly distributes clear, clean water everywhere I want the paint to move. So wherever you want a smooth shadow, you paint clean, clear water, and you paint the water beyond where you want the paint to go because you want the edge to be soft. So then once I get the area I want to have a shadow in wet evenly, not puddling, but just wet, I drop in fairly thick paint and it's darker towards the cat. And as it goes away from the cat, it gets lighter. And as you get more experienced in painting shadows, you can really play with color and shadows. There's a lot of fun things you can do with shadows. In fact, the Basset Hound I'm about to release to my students is going to have all kinds of hot pinks and oranges and blues in the shadow. And it's a really fun place to play with shadows, and also a great place to play with lost edges. Like you see, his right leg melts completely into the shadow. And in fact, that's one of Charles Reed's top 5 tips, is make your cast shadows melt completely into whatever it is that's casting that shadow. So that can really make your painting look really painterly, to use shadows as an opportunity to have lost edges where you can't really see the edge. In this case, the black leg melts completely into the shadow. And I really could have played a lot more with color in these shadows, but I wanted to keep it as simple as possible for my beginners. Another thing I want you to notice about this painting is that the green in the eyes is repeated in the ribbon. So you don't want to have a color just in one place in a painting, like the green in the eye and nowhere else. So just keep in mind and try to find ways to incorporate colors that are in one place in your painting in other parts of the painting. And shadows can be a good place, but luckily I had this ribbon. It made it so easy to put the pinks of the nose and the greens of the eye into the ribbon, and it really helped pull this painting together. Now I'm going to share a little bit more about what I'm working on and what you can expect from me in the next few months. Here we go. And I want to talk a little bit more about where I am in my journey and how that affects my members and my students online. And where I am right now is I am trying to get my signature membership in some higher level watercolor societies, which I just got my first one. I'm so excited. Lynn Pratt, who is an amazing realistic watercolor painter, started Women in Watercolor, and she invites artists from all over the world. So it's an international competition, and she allows contestants to enter any work from any year of any of their painting practice. So it is the best women watercolorists submitting their best work from years of work from their archives. You can submit from your archives. And so really amazing artwork gets into this competition. I highly recommend that you check out her website. It is amazing, all the paintings that get in, and it is an honor to even get juried into this show. And for 3 years in a row, I've gotten an honorable mention. And so that has earned me my Women in Watercolor signature status, which means that at the end of my name, I can write WIW, which means Women in Watercolor, which is kind of like being able to write PhD behind your name. So it's just a really great accomplishment that I'm very proud of, and I'm kind of pinching myself to be considered good enough to have that designation. So thank you so much to Lynn Pratt and Women in Watercolor and all the hard work I know she does to make that competition a reality. Also, last week I shared the fox, and last week I had this epiphany when I painted this fox. This painting surprised me. I thought that, I was thinking to myself, I'm going to paint more tight. I'm going to paint wet on dry. I'm going to use easier techniques so that I can set up my more beginner members for success. And I had seen some members post paintings or just say, "It's not you, Rachel. It's just me. I just can't do it." I can't stand to hear that. I hate that. I want to set everyone up for success. I want everyone to be successful. So I painted in a simpler way for this tutorial, and I was, sorry, there's that line. Okay, there we go. I was pleasantly surprised with how dreamy and impressionistic I was able to get this using mostly wet on dry, pretty simple, straightforward techniques. I was really excited. So I am determined to do more of these kinds of paintings for you guys. And so this week, I have a new 3-hour start to finish tutorial of Lola's ribbon. I've called this Lola's ribbon in honor of the beautiful Lola. And just know that even if you're not ready to join a paid tier, you can join as a member with my Patreon for free. But what makes me different than a lot of other tutorial instructors is a lot of instructors, they give you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. A lot of them practice their paintings before they do the tutorial. I show you the first try usually of a painting, and often I paint it more than once to really understand the image and understand the technique that I want to use for that particular image. And it's messy and it goes forward and back. It's not a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you're done process. It's 1, 5, 4, 2, 10, 1, 0, -2. So I'm showing you how to fix mistakes. And I've heard a lot of really good watercolor artists, professional artists who I admire say, watercolor is just a series of making mistakes and fixing them. So when you watch my tutorials, you're going to learn a lot of fixing techniques. And you're also going to learn a lot of how to pull your painting together at the very end. And I'm really big on this because it's when you put that last bit of work in the end of your process, usually that a painting comes together. You bring it out of the ugly stage. In fact, I have a whole video about the ugly stage. So remember, whenever I post a video up in this corner for you to check out, it will not take you out of this video. It'll just queue it up for you to watch later. So I will link that tutorial about how to pull your painting out of the ugly stage. But I do share my very best tips here on my YouTube channel for free. And that's as a thank you for what the universe has given me to be able to stay home with my son and make a living with my art. So I appreciate it so much. So that's kind of where I am as a teacher, which is I'm trying to make more accessible type of content. I will always also share my more advanced paintings. In fact, the paintings that I won Women in Watercolor with, won my signature status. That would be Diana's Patio, Rainbow Zebra, and what's the other one? I forget. I'll put it here. Diana's Patio, you can watch that from start to finish. And it is a painting that has won an award in a national show. And it is one of the paintings that won an award in an international Women in Watercolor show that helped me gain my status. And you can watch that very advanced painting from start to finish on my Patreon. So there's a lot of advanced work on my, there's a lot of advanced tutorials on my Patreon. There's a lot of beginner, I'm working on getting more beginner tutorials on my Patreon as well. If you approach my content on Patreon as a demonstration to see how I do things, to get ideas to inspire your art and get new ideas to push your art forward, I think that is the best way to use my advanced tutorials, even for beginners. I wish I would have had this kind of content when I was a beginner. And I just get frustrated when I watch other advanced artists. I watch tutorials too. I'm still learning too. And I pass what I learn on to you when it's respectful of that artist to do so. And I notice though that they don't take you through the stages, especially the final stages of making the painting more of a gallery level, professional looking painting. They don't show you how to pull it all together. So I have made it my mission to show you the good, the bad, and the ugly of painting. So that's kind of what sets me apart. So if you're interested in that, I'd love you to join my Patreon, but join my Patreon for free anyway, because then you'll get updates on my free content. And sometimes I even share real-time footage from parts of my tutorials with my free members or my $3 members. So I try to really give you value, no matter what value or no matter what tier you choose to join. All right, I think that's enough rambling for one day. So thank you so much for joining me for this tutorial. Next week, I will probably post something on, I don't know. I've got a lot coming up, y'all. I've got so many paintings done. I've got this painting. This is a very experimental painting. I don't think the techniques were too complicated, but I was experimenting with painting on watercolor ground. And by the way, this is Biscuit the Basset Hound, who has his own Facebook page. So thank you to his mommy for allowing me to paint Biscuit the Basset, who has a Facebook page that you can visit. And he's a lot of fun, just a looking at his pictures will make you smile. And so I did a lot of experimental techniques with that. I played with my I have this stupid, okay, I'll just hold it like this, I guess. Um, I played with my opalescence effect, which I made a video about. I'll link that up in the upper right-hand corner. Using glowing wet and wet techniques to really create kind of an opalescent effect. I did that in the shadows, and it's so cool. So I'll share that probably next week or in a couple weeks. I've got some Christmas trees I think I'm going to push out soon. A lot coming up. So stay tuned and join me next week. And until then, go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.